And with all of that, I will pass to Stephen to kick it off. You ready?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
So much. Zoe, yeah, as Zoe mentioned, everyone, of course, has a sales problem in their mind. And I've met hundreds of companies in my work with StartX, which is Stanford's accelerator, Skydeck, which is Berkeley's accelerator. I do Nordic Innovation House, I do Plug and Play, and then I do a few healthcare accelerators over my career. And after hundreds of meetings, it's pretty clear to me that folks clearly have more than simply a sales problem. So we're gonna talk about that. This is sort of a passion project for me as well, because I would like to share with you my perspectives. Of course, they're mine and mine only, based on my experience. But let's talk through it. So our agenda today is we're going to talk about P2M fit for pre-Chasm products, and why we're focused on this specifically. Number two, the climate, COVID-19, and the new economies that complicate your already difficult task. We're going to diagnose your situation, hopefully, for you to determine what are the symptoms of a P2M fit problem or a sales problem. And that's the genesis of this discussion, because I asked a lot of these same questions, or I hear a lot of the same answers, when I'm meeting startups. And then lastly, we're going to really roll up our sleeves. And as you can tell, I already have my sleeves rolled up. How to craft a winning product market fit and scale. Some of the tools that I use. So we're going to focus on refine your P2M fit strategy. We're going to talk about craft the commercialization strategy with sort of the COVID-19 overlay. And then we're going to execute and iterate upon the plan that we've created. So before I go on, we're going to ask you to fill out a poll. Not now, but in a few slides, after we go through this diagnosis issue. So please be patient. But what I'm going to ask you is, of the three areas, refining or hardening up your P2M fit strategy, or focusing on the commercialization strategy, or on the execution, which of the three would you like to spend more time today? Okay, so another thing I'd like to say is I'm mostly only focused on disruptive technology. I'm imagining that most folks listening today are disrupting some industry. And another thing I like to use is a lot of metaphors. Having been a competitive sailor and a competitive bike racer, I find the competitive sailing metaphor is really apt, because you have if you race keelboats with a crew of 5, that's about the size of your founding team. And it's all about wind over your sails, setting a course, being extremely iterative in how you address flexibility and the changes in the marketplace, and trying to figure out what's the best course. So I ask your forgiveness early on, but hopefully you'll find them instructive. So what are we going to talk about today? And that is the importance of product market fit for pre-Chasm products, which most of you probably have 10 to 15 customers, if not maybe in the teens, below 100. And as I like to say, if you're in the enterprise tech space, most anyone can get 10 to 15 customers. The challenge is going from those innovator early adopter customers, jumping the chasm to an early majority customer. And that early majority is really, the question is, can you land user value, enterprise value, and then ultimately achieve business value, which is generally a way to say, can you scale the business in a way to address hundreds, thousands, millions of customers in a way that's economic. So P2M fit. I don't imagine I'm going to get a lot of pushback on the audience today about whether or not that's critical to an early stage startup, but I thought I'd share folks that you probably have heard of. You probably never heard of me, but so Andy Ratcliffe. If you address a market that really wants your product, if the dogs are eating the dog food, then you can screw up almost anything in the company and you'll succeed. Conversely, If you're really good at execution, but the dogs don't want to eat the dog food, you have no chance of winning. I completely agree with that sentiment.
Steven, sorry to interrupt you, but I don't think we can see your dog. You have to
Really?
use the screen, yeah.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Well,
That's
this must be a really boring
okay.
presentation for folks. So I have access, yes? There we go.
You do. You can just click share screen like
There we go.
Yes, here we go.
Sorry, guys.
No problem.
All right. We even practiced this. All right.
You did.
So, all right, everybody. All right. Can everyone see this now?
Yes.
Fantastic. So, Andy Ratcliffe. Next, people have probably heard of Mark Andreessen. You can always feel when product market fit isn't happening. The customers aren't quite getting value. Product word of mouth isn't spreading. Usage isn't growing that fast. Sales cycle takes way too long and the deals never close. And then Sam Altman. Until you get product market fit, you want to live as long as possible, which is extremely apt for today, right? And then iterate as quickly as possible. And then my last and favorite is from Jack Barker, CEO. Wait, I think I have this in a video format, so I'll share this with you guys.
Jeff, you and I have a problem. Okay, your salespeople are telling me to cut everything cool about the platform just because it's a little bit harder for them to sell. But don't you think because they are such amazing salespeople that it would be okay for them to sell the harder stuff?
No, doesn't work that way. The way you keep the best salespeople is you need to give them something easy to sell. Otherwise, they just go somewhere else. Okay.
As ridiculous as that sounds, no truer words have been spoken. You can hire all the salespeople you want. And if the product doesn't solve a problem and the customers don't see it, or it solves a problem, but you're trying to sell it to the wrong customer, no one's going to buy it. So let's look at your brethren and your sisters. How many folks fail? About 90% of startups fail in the enterprise space. And that's before the pandemic. So, and what's the number one reason that startups fail? Well, the top 5. Number 1 with a bullet is no market need, or I would call it no product to market fit. So, add COVID-19. Extremely challenging times, as I'm sure we all can attest. Unless you're in the healthcare space and the diagnosis or vaccine space, right? And those folks are probably killing it, provided that they could, create a product. There's enormous uncertainty as to past business models and who will survive, right? Look at Square's business. They were doubling down mostly on SMBs, and that business evaporated. Same with Airbnb. Product to market fit is a moving target for you. Because again, a lot of these industries and economies are changing. Look at Uber, right? Uber, one could argue, they haven't abandoned their rideshare business, but their rideshare business shrunk by about 75%. So what did take off was their meal delivery business. And of course, they just acquired Grubhub. The other challenge, of course, is that, we're all human. So as you go and try to sell your enterprise to folks, who are like me and like you, currently at home, you're competing with our attention. And where is our attention focused right now? It's probably focused on just the mechanics of driving our boat, making our boat sail. That's all we care about, and our families. And then the other challenge, of course, is runway capital. If you don't have VCs in your pipeline who love you and already support you, it's going to be tough. And of course, sales are harder to obtain as well. And then lastly, and I truly believe this is true, COVID-19 is not an interruption in business. It's a fundamental reset in how every economy, geography, government is going to go forward. So this is something that we all have to embrace. And don't get me wrong, there are enormous opportunities, good ones. You know, I focus on sustainability, and I live in Palo Alto, and everyone drives either a Tesla or mostly a gas-powered SUV. You know, that wasn't going to change anytime soon. But, you know, places like, as Zoe mentioned, you know, when we looked at the business of Neo, you know, where do we want to be? And I worked on the enterprise product that basically creates the electric, connected, and automated platform that the Neo cars are based, and we sold those to other OEMs. Where would we sell that product? Well, would you sell it in the US? No, there's no market here. China is aggressively moving, you know, towards their sustainability goals. So is the Nordics. So all I'm saying is you have to be very open to receiving good data in a low data decision making environment. And then one more other issue is, and I got this from NFX, and that is when you look at your perceptions, founder perceptions, and VC perceptions, just to level set and make sure that you're equipped to address, you know, your capital needs. You can see from this that there is a pretty big disparity in when VCs think we'll recover and where founders think will recover. So, despite all this data, most technical founders think they have a sales problem. That's just so how do we figure out if you have a PDM fit problem or a sales problem? Well, I have 5 symptoms that I've gone through with Zoe, and we think these are the most commonly heard statements or answers to questions that I ask. And when I look at, you know, the pre-Chasm companies, I always remember what Jim Collins said, you know, use bullets instead of cannonballs, because you guys have limited resources. You know, you can't afford to shoot bullets in the air, right? You need to make sure you hit the target. So symptom number 1. We take all inbound requests seriously for sales opportunities and are industry agnostic. We don't have a compelling elevator pitch. Number 2, we use our network to get customer meetings without thought to product market fit. Founders are way too busy to meet with customers. Again, lack of course and commitment means that you'll end up miles off course. 3, salespeople tell us customers want significant customization to the product to address problem sets not contemplated. And there is no consensus among these requests. So basically the customer is saying, we hear your vision, we just don't agree with it. Symptom 4. Sorry, guys. None of our prospective customers look alike. We don't have any case studies or white papers to share with them. And number 5, we try to land POCs because we're too early to ask for sales, and we haven't fully figured out our pricing. It takes over 9 months to close deals. And I know it sounds controversial, but I am of the firm belief that POCs are not sales. You know, POCs are founders' way of saying, gee, we're not sure if this is going to work out. We don't have enough confidence in selling you our product. And then the customer hears that and mimics back to you and says, yeah, sure, let's just try it out and see if it works. You may or not get paid. It could be a huge mistake for you. So how do we execute upon a well-crafted go-to-market strategy with the winning PDM fit? So we're going to talk about 3 things, as we discussed earlier in the agenda slide that you couldn't see because I didn't share it with you. Harden up your PDM fit, then iterate, iterate, and iterate. The second was craft our commercialization strategy with the COVID-19 overlay, of course, and then execute and continue to iterate your plan. So right now, we're going to take a moment, and Gene is going to circulate a poll. There you go. And everyone vote. And then I will adjust my webinar pitch accordingly.
Just to clarify, Stephen, you will still cover all of the topics, right? It's just based on—
Of course. Yeah. Of course. It's just that I'll spend more time on one than the others. Believe me, I think they're all important. You know, that's why we're doing this. my only agenda is to try to be as helpful as I can to early stage companies and share some of the things that, I've tripped up on. I've learned it the hard way.
Okay, great. We have the
All
results.
right. Well, I like that. That's a good answer. Okay. Fantastic. All right. Well, here we go. So I would say, and I'm glad that people responded in that sense. It wasn't a clear and overwhelmingly victory for the first category, but it's the one that I think is most important. Because think about it. If you set off in a sailboat without a course, how in the world will you get there? I remind folks that, when you race sailboats and you have a sloppy team, it looks like you're competitive, for the first maybe quarter mile, half mile, but then, gosh, your competitors get farther and farther away from you because you have no plan. So let's talk about that. Let's make sure that you guys have a plan. So every startup has a story. I have so many stories, too many to tell, but on the left side, there's time and data that we use to create our companies. And then on the right, there's workflow and tools. There's, our process of addressing that problem and the tools that we use. So it all starts with intuition, right? Maybe you're working in the space, in the industry, and you feel like there's a problem that is not being met. So you create this idea, you sketch it out, this alpha product. And then you get a little more experience. Maybe you leverage your experience in the industry. And you start talking to customers and colleagues who are in the space to make sure that you're iterating properly and you completely understand the problem. And then you maybe tap into some domain expertise, not just yours, but others, as you narrow down and try to figure out, does anyone care about this? And then you create some use cases, plus personas, well, I think I understand the problem, but what specifically, what is the use case that I can address? Then you look at, what else in the industry environment creates an opportunity for me? Why now? Why wasn't this problem solved 5 years ago? And then you look at the competitive landscape. Do you have any competitors? Are you first mover? And sometimes it makes, founders wonder, should I be in that space? If no one's in it, maybe that tells me something. Then you kind of look at market studies and see what's out there. And then you start identifying the value of what you're building. And then you start making customer pitches because, there's no better truth than asking a customer who you think you solve their problem for money. And then maybe you start seeing competitors pop up, or maybe you're bumping up against the incumbent, you're disrupting that incumbent. And then you start addressing can I get a sale over a POC? What does my success look like? Then how do I price this product? You start learning more about, revenue, cost drivers, and how do you quantify the value you provide? And then hopefully, by now you've got a handful of customers and you start seeing from that experience, what kind of success that they're having and you're having. And then by then, hey, I think we've nailed the MVP. So maybe there's a business model that we can apply to grow this company. And then of course, competition starts rearing its ugly head. And then you start building up your organization to address the business model, and boom, product market fit. Where you've attained the user, enterprise, and the business value. It's really critical. So that's the process that I think everyone follows. If they're paying attention, they're iterating properly, and they're really trying to solve a problem that they can monetize. So what do I start with? Well, I'm a huge fan of Geoffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm. And I learned this, I was in my first startup and the dot-com boom. We pivoted from being an e-tailer to a supply chain software company. I remember eToys was next door And, they were wildly successful until they weren't. We were also an e-tailer, and they brought a bunch of us in to say, listen, is this sustainable? We raised like $50 million. In 2000, it's a lot of money, for a company, especially an e-tail company. So we clearly identified some of the issues, but one of the tools that we used was Jeffrey Moore's crossing the chasm analysis. So I don't know Jeffrey Moore. I don't get paid plugging him, but go on Amazon, buy the book. It's a couple of bucks. Get the paper version. It's a Bible for trying to understand the life cycle of technology adoption for disruptive companies. And so that's where we're going to start. So what that does, it helps you identify your target beachhead customers, right? You have to distinguish your whole product from your partial product. It creates a value sale matrix. You have to start creating early pricing models, because if you can't do that, you're probably not headed in the right direction. You have to determine how you're different than the alternatives, and the alternatives may not be a technology product. We might disrupt a human being, but if it's, again, a solution that solves a problem, that's quite all right. We look at the competitive landscape and matrix, and then I'm a huge believer in sort of rapid design thinking plus sales, where you're consular selling. And in addition, you're asking the right questions and you're listening very carefully to what the customer is telling you. If you do 50 to 75 sales calls and you pay attention, there's probably going to be 80% that's similar in what you're hearing from customers. And then you iterate that. And then, if you're lucky, you identify your next target customer. So all of this is done initially with the idea in mind that you have very low data, right, that you have access to, because you guys are establishing a new product. And when there's a new product offering, of course there aren't already generally competitors out there in the marketplace. So you're kind of forging your own path. You're setting a new course. You're going into open ocean that's never been sailed before. So what do I use? So within Chasm, he has what he calls the elevator pitch. So when I meet, let's say maybe startups for the second time, because I always get asked for a second meeting, and my first meetings are really designed for, do I think these guys have a chance? I'm trying to say no to the second meeting, but if they get past that, if I think these guys have something, then I'll say, okay, great. We're going to go through what's your elevator pitch. Most people don't have that, or they have something that makes no sense, because they're technical founders and they're thinking of their product from an engineering perspective, and they're not thinking about the value from a customer's perspective. So what this template asks you to do is, it has, and I've capitalized the template. So it says for, who are dissatisfied with, you are, that provides, unlike, we have assembled. I guarantee you, if you haven't done this, do it today. Get your team in a room, get a whiteboard up. Well, you're probably not in the same place. So get your virtual whiteboard up. This is the most candid, gut-wrenching, controversial, messy it's great. Everyone's offering their opinions. You've got a lot of different data sources. You're hearing from every side of the founder. Some founders are in the engineering side, some are on the product side, some are on the commercial side. It is an awesome experience, and it forces you to drill down and distill what it is that you want to tell a prospective customer. So for Debate Hall, again, we are originally, and it was a company I met in a coffee shop, believe it or not, in Venice, California. And I was, meeting another enterprise startup. They heard me speak, liked these guys. They were fans of Jon Stewart, and they were trying to bring what Jon Stewart does to the internet. And this is 2010 timeframe. I moved to LA from New York City, and they're getting no traction. They were the direct-to-consumer model, but weirdly, although they weren't getting who they thought to use the product, they were getting tons of debaters, meaning high school debaters who wanted to use their product to debate their other teams or other colleagues. And so it caused us to rethink the product and focus on the product market fit. So as you can see, we originally developed a product that really wasn't a consumer, social media tool. It was for speech, debate, communications educators who were dissatisfied with the limitations of synchronous, video conferencing in debate education, which effectively made coaches have to be available at the time the coaching needed to take place. So we became a sort of an asynchronous video with a rubric, a judging tool, and a private social media tool that was a completely new product category that provided educators and students the ability to control the pace, place, and time of their skill development. And the other thing that this caught the attention was for underserved communities, schools that wanted to have a debate and social discourse class, but couldn't because there were no coaches available. Now you can go worldwide. So unlike synchronous video conferencing or in-person alternatives, we have assembled an accessible to everyone, anywhere asynchronous video, social media, and evaluation rubric tool. So you can see what we did. It took several weeks to do that, but that's where we started. So did we stop there? No, we went deeper, right? Because again, it was a revelation. It allowed us to narrow our focus, and really it allowed us to narrow our resource use, which was really critical because it was a seed stage company. They had no money, which is my favorite thing, where you're basically sweat equity and trying to grow this company, was just, you have to be really accurate and correct in most everything you do. So this was another template that I created that is a value sales segment. So the initial elevator pitch was pretty broad. We can poke holes in it and say, well, educators, what do you mean? What kind of educators? Who is the user? Who is the enterprise? What kind of business did you have? So we created all the value propositions that we had heard from, multiple, like tens, 50, 60 meetings with people who use the product, with school systems, with debate systems. And we created a list, we ranked it, and then we created each user or cohort or stakeholder across the right side. And then that helped us sort of evaluate where the best opportunity was, at least we thought. And then we also looked to the landscape, the marketplace. Now this, of course, isn't the landscape that I use for Debate Hall, unfortunately. I couldn't find it. But this was a landscape that I used at XPT, which was the Neo subsidiary. And I tried to use something that wasn't controversial, wouldn't share confidential information. So I created this sort of L4 to L5 roadmap. You can see on the lower, I pretty much had we had every category, within what we considered was a potential value sale for our product. Remember when I said that we created the platform that provided a vehicle to be electric, connected, and automated. So when you think about that, it's a pretty big space. And, we weren't in the L4, L5 space, right? Because that's Zoox, that's Cruise, that's Waymo, that's a multi-billion-dollar long-term, bet strategy. We were in the ADAS space, which is level 2 plus. How do you get vehicles to drive, by themselves down the highway, within certain use cases. Again, I just wanted to show this to you so you can see how you can configure it. Because again, this is your discipline. You approach your product, and the more you know, the more you're disciplined to garner information on your competitors in the space, the better for you. It'll help you set the course that will be most helpful to you. So I know, Zoe, that this is the space where folks wanted to spend a lot more time. I'm looking at the time now, we're at 10:33, which means that I have, maybe 15 minutes left. Is there anything, I can't see the chat box. Are there any questions popping up from anybody on this specific area?
Not yet. We can keep going because we
Great.
have time in the end for Q&A.
Great. Okay, so we can dig deeper in this in the question and answer period, but this is at basic level. This is what I would do if I were you. And I think as we start crafting the commercialization strategy and we explore that a little bit, you'll start to see that it's really taking the product to market fit, at least what we think it is, and distilling down even more. It doesn't mean that you've set, it's not like we've created the product market fit and now we're just going to go sell it. Don't think of it that way. Think of it as being extremely flexible. It's like, you know, when you sail a boat, you know, and the wind is out of the northwest, it's at 265, and all of a sudden swells start, you know, coming up at 10, 15 feet. And so you can't just sail a straight line. You're like, oh my God, I have to go up the swell and down the swell because the sail changes its angle. I mean, that's how you should think about your commercialization strategy. So let's talk about that next. So how do we do that? Well, number one is, again, iterate. So create the value chain for your target customer. And that's really, really critical. You have to map out the value for your product. Secondly, you need to get clear about pricing your product. And I know it's really hard for young companies to do that because competitors don't exist. Or if they do, they don't really do the same thing. For example, how do you address an enterprise competitor that doesn't use AI? You know, it's a completely different value sale. You also have to look at, you know, potential channel opportunities. This is really critical because in some instances, you know, a lot of companies, to some degree, you have to talk to the end user, the customers, you know, the end user, the enterprise user, you know, to figure out if you have a business here. But there may be channels that exist already where you're extremely complementary to, and they would carry a bag for you, you know, so you become just focused on the product and your P2M fits and working with them to be your sales force. And then, you know, you have to avoid the COVID-19 hotspots. So how do we do these things? So one of the templates that I really like, and I think I can share this with you guys, but I worked with a colleague of mine, brilliant engineer and brilliant competitive sailor. And not surprisingly, he became a value engineer for Oracle, and then, you know, he's worked for many different companies. But, you know, really looking at what value you provide and where you should focus initially. So I'm not going to go through this customer value identification deck. It is huge, but I can see if I can share it with you post webinar. But it forces you to walk through and ask the questions you need to ask. For example, once we figured out our product to market fit, who are we going to use within our organization to mount the invasion, right? And to whom? So identify accountability, right? So if it's your head of product, and they're going to be your initial evangelist, which would make sense, right? Because again, we're probably still too early to go hire a chief commercial officer or a head of sales. And again, think of it as a cone on its side. You know, it's really critical at this stage in your company that you keep the team very small and tight so you can knowledge share and iterate and understand where you're going. Because the minute that you start hiring people to execute on your plan, you better have that plan pretty solidly, you know, baked. So this will force you to create a customer profile. And that customer profile will be, for example, for XPT, it's going to be a legacy OEM who wants to get into the business of electrification in China, right? So we literally geographic, industry, and we even have, and I can't go into the very specifics because it's a company that's ongoing and their sales process is still continuing. But you know, you really have to narrow it down. And then you go through account intelligence. You literally name names. And then you name the people within those customers that you need to reach. And then you figure out your partner strategy, and then you iterate. So when I say all stakeholders, right, as part of that value identification, who are the customers that you're trying to address? You got the user, right? They actually use the product to their workflow. You got the champion, that more likely than not, that champion is going to be accountable for the KPIs for which your product solves the problem, right? You've got the buyer, could be procurement, operations, finance. You got the evaluator. These are operations, compliance, and IT guys. You've got the deciders, right? The folks that will ultimately say yay or nay on spending the money. And then believe me, you'll have lots of inhibitors. Folks that could be in the engineering department. We can build that, believe me. Having worked in healthcare and in mobility, there are so many legacy companies where internal teams will fight in buying your product because they will take umbrage and they'll say, well, I could build that. You've got to identify who your government influences are. For example, with XBT, again, the reason why we're in China is because the government has said 12% of all vehicles sold in China by 2020 will be electric. So whereas versus the US, where all of the incentives are dwindling under this current administration. So where would you rather work, right? Where would you try to sell your product? Where it's easy or where it's hard? There are industry influencers, of course. Again, you look for, China, Asia, Nordics, where whole industries that serve that industry want to get into the space as well. So they're really good partners. And then channels. And then pricing. So I'm sure you've all heard this before. There are cost drivers, there are revenue drivers. And the reason I bolded that is, cost drivers are fine, but oh my God, if I hear one more pitch from a company that says how much more efficient they make in an enterprise, I'd say if that is your only value proposition, unless it's, 300% savings, you need to figure out how to be a revenue driver, especially in this sort of post-pandemic era. The way to get in, the way to solve a problem, and the problem to solve is help a business understand how you can improve their revenue. You can also look at competition, even if it's not direct competition, what are they charging just as a guideline? And then for channels, channels might provide you a ready set pricing model because they want to use your product with another one of their products that make their prices and their products that much more competitive. And then of course, we can't ignore literally the workflow that is COVID-19. That is, you're selling to human beings. So, first you have to say, well, based on what's happening in the world, given our initial product to market fit and how we perceive our solution set, are we going to be viable? Are our customers viable, right? If we're selling to a customer that will go away, let's say you're selling to the airlines, unless you can help the airlines drive revenue, that business is shrinking, at least for the near term, right? So, and then secondly, just look at the workflow of how geographies and economies and your customers are, their world are addressing COVID-19 hotspots. You have to be sensitive to that, right? And how can you not, right? Because you're probably not meeting them in person. You're probably meeting them through, Zoom or video conferencing. So these are just examples, but there's so much information to help you understand what's happening in specific geographies and specific industries. So all you need to do is just look for it and you can find it. And then on execution and iteration, how are we doing on time? Oh, good. My favorite topic is, and I will share with you that my 5-year-old looked at this and I said, well, Magnus, which cow would you rather be? And he said he wanted to be the cow on the ladder. And I'm telling you, you don't want to be the cow on the ladder. And again, my apologies for the simplicity here, but you guys, and you understand this, I'm sure, but the brilliance of the valley is that we're lazy. We want to go where it's easy. And if it's easy, that means that they want to, the dogs want to eat your dog food, that you solve a problem. So sell it to them, and move on. It's a really important lesson to learn as a young company. You know, I'll share with you, I was a founding team of a startup in the pharma space. And the original founding team was looking at trying to sell to big pharma. And it was a reverse CRM product. So effectively a dual marketplace. So they're serving providers and they're serving pharma. Well, guess what? You know, they were trying to sell to Pfizer and Merck and all these guys, but those guys didn't care because they weren't relevant to them. So we flipped it. We went directly to the providers, and the providers loved it because the providers had a compliance issue, you know, where they were getting pounded by, you know, licensing boards to say, well, you know, we're going to tighten up on how pharma interacts with you. So it provided them a management tool as well as a front office management tool to dictate how they would interact, and a record, you know, a ledger, so it were. So that reverse, we flipped it, created an enormous amount of success, you know, in that model. And it was easy, right? It was amazing. I mean, our salespeople came back and said, no one's saying no. Everyone's like literally, you know, signing up. And then execute and iterate on the value sale collateral. These are things that I'm sure you folks understand generally, right? You know, based on your product to market fit and based on the commercialization strategy that we discussed, you know, you create the value sale collateral using the same words that you created as you distilled it. And then case studies and white papers, the purpose that you do those things is, again, remember, you're early. So there will only be so many innovator early adopter customers. And the reason why those folks are important to you is the early majority won't move. They won't buy anything unless they see that someone else is using that product. So you need to evangelize the fact that, hey, that someone you care about is killing it with our product. So that's why case studies and white papers are really critical to do. So it's really, think about it as customer success broadcast to the world, you know, and you know, it's a form of PR, right? Virtual conferences, all these things. We won't spend a lot of time on these, but these are some of the things, these buckets that you have to focus on. And let's get more specific. When you create your collateral, when you create your narrative to going to sell to these ecosystems, you got to know that, again, you're selling to human beings. Human beings are measured by a certain thing. You know, sometimes it's, I'm risk averse, so prove to me that you will solve my problem. And the best way to do that is to find out what motivates. So if a CEO is under the gun, you know, from their board and from, let's say, their public company, you know, under their shareholders for moving the needle on new revenue generation or digital transformation, tap into that, right? And CFOs manage the books, right? Cash flow, P&L, in and out. You know, procurement, you know, you have to address and understand how each individual stakeholder is motivated. So make sure you create a really clear pricing model and deployment timeline. I'm working with a company right now that they're still trying to figure out their pricing timeline, and they're selling to a fantastic new channel, but it's taken 9 months now. And the reason is they didn't start with a clear pricing model. So guess what? Guess what it became? It became a negotiation process many months in the making of what that price will be. Legal and compliance, again, having run legal teams and compliance teams, trust me, make it easy on those people. Don't make it hard. If you're in a heavy regulated industry, you know, grease the ramps for them. Say, hey, here's our privacy policies. Here's how we comply with the law. Here's our contract. It's been vetted. It's, you know, it's accepted by, you know, companies of your size, that sort of thing. And then IT, right? Cybersecurity. And then just quick, since we're a little pressed on time, quick examples of showing clearly how you're a leader in your space. NewCo, of course, is, you know, the example here, and how you kill it compared to your competitors. Lastly, but not least, is you've got limited resources. I'm sure I don't need to remind you. So there's nothing more important than the discipline to say no. No is hard, right? Because it requires you to make a decision. You got to say no to customers who aren't aren't familiar to your persona and use case. If you spent all this time, you guys are mostly pretty sure that this is your fit and it fits and you built the MVP for this customer. And someone comes out of left field and says, hey, I think we'd like your product, but we're not sure. And you've never thought of them, it's probably a bad fit. Don't waste your time, right? Again, don't waste your time on strategics or partners who aren't aligned with your P2M plan. POCs, I'm not saying don't say no, turn it into a sale. Say, listen, we're gonna sell you the product. And if it doesn't work out, you have a 3-month out. But if it does, it goes right to pay. You know, say no to any hire that isn't aligned with your revenue. And then say no to any product modifications that, again, don't align with your plan. You know, where you have some customer says, you know, we'd really love it to do this. It's okay to say, if you have enough customers telling you that, to say, here's our product roadmap, it'll come out in 2 months. But if it's out of left field, just say no. And then lastly, drive your boat. Set your target customer and focus. Focus, focus, focus. Make decisions. Because if you don't make decisions, they'll be made for you. And then iterate and course correct. How are we doing on time? Oh, sorry, I went a little over.
Doing great, no problem. We actually got a few questions. First of all, people are asking if we're happy to share the presentation. The answer is yes.
Yep.
Email me at zoe@mpmptc.com. I can share the presentation deck with you. And here we have a few questions. One from Susan. She's asking, do you think there is value in paid for market research analysis?
Good question. Depends on your stage. Of course, there is, but it depends on what it is. So, you know, we got inundated at of course, Neo, right? So the minute that you're a unicorn, everyone comes out of the woodwork. So I think, you know, I'm at first name basis with every, you know, name your marketing firm, disruptive innovation, you know, in the Valley and Tel Aviv and China. But you have to be really careful. I would only use market information as a validator, you know, meaning, and again, it's hard to say, what space, can I ask what space you're in?
Yes.
Can she respond with, you know, is it biotech? Is it enterprise software? Is it hardware?
I can't see here. So for Susan, if you're still with us.
Yeah, if you can just pipe in, but I'm just saying that, you know, paid for it, of course, right? Provided that it supports, you know, your low data. If you don't have enough information without this paid for source, I'm a little curious, right? If you need to go spend a ton of money on market research before you can start talking to customers and iterate, I'm a little worried. But again, it depends on the industry, right? It depends on the build of the product. So.
Okay, great. And then, oh, Susan said she's in RegTech, regulation.
Yeah, so, wow, that's a space that I know well, having been GC for public and private companies. Yeah, I mean, but if you're in basically GDPR, which I assume that's what she's speaking about, that's a known, we know what that heat map looks like, right? We know what, you know, worldwide, what that landscape looks like. So I would, and being an early stage company, in order to build that product, you're gonna have to understand that stuff cold. So I wouldn't go immediately to paid. You know, I would try to, you know, figure it out, get as far as I could on the early gestation. But again, it just depends on where you are on the stage and if you have the money.
Great, thanks. And we have a question from Craig, and he says, what are the lessons about the sales process implied in the focus on product to market fit? For example, one lesson might be that the skill set of an individual salesperson might be far less important than other factors. Most companies focus on past sales success, but it seems this may be misleading for early stage companies.
Oh, excellent question. And I agree completely. The reason I used that clip from Silicon Valley is that is truth. Early stage companies, the salespeople need to be the founders initially, right? Because there's too much information that you get in those meetings. Salespeople are tactical, love salespeople, absolutely. Salespeople, though, you have to understand what kind of animal a really good salesperson is. The tactical salesperson is a person that will literally hit 100 customers a day, or 25, or whatever their pipeline looks like, and not be fazed by no. They'll drill hard and long on the value sale that you guys created for them. But they're not folks that are going to be really paying attention to, gee, is what I'm selling actually solve the problem? So know that salespeople are tactical. So understand that you, founders, need to be that sales function early in the development. I hope that answered the question.
Perfect, thank you. And here we have one from actually a cyber startup in my current batch. And Ariel's asking, in the cyberspace, focusing on a revenue driver is challenging. What type of ROI argument do you see resonate with the cost center?
Depends, again, right? It really depends on the industry. So the reason I say, and I'm not convinced that they're only going to be a cost driver product. There are ways to look at the product and how it solves problems. I mean, I guess if you're hey, we compress, vision, storage, and save you money, right? But at the end of the day, if you save them money in one area, it frees up capital for that customer to drive revenue in another, right? So I would really, my only concern is that right now, especially post-pandemic, given the limited, attention span of teams, revenue driving products will get the most attention. I'm not saying don't change your product. I'm just saying that I would go through that exercise that we discussed and explore ways that, you may support revenue.
Thank you. And here we have a startup from marketing and advertisement tech space. And they're asking, they say, our solution improves the ROI for marketers and reduces waste in their marketing waste. How would you position the personal revenue drivers for this type of offering?
So run that by me one more time. So they sell to enterprise companies that who is their customer?
The marketers, I think, in enterprise tech companies.
So, online marketing companies or retailers that market online?
For that, if Iktar, if you can answer that question and Q&A or on chat, that would be great.
Yeah, so I mean, it all depends. Again, what I would do is I would go through that process and understand why anyone would care, right? Because it's a very crowded space, products that manage online assets, your marketing, marketing dashboards, and how do you push, your customer, either you're an enterprise product that helps retailers or you're an enterprise product that helps other enterprises help customers, right? At the end of the day, given digital transformation and how important that is today, I would say, pre-pandemic, it's still a trajectory that's fairly lockstep, but now we've accelerated online, right? So weirdly, I have a company in the Nordics that they pivoted to video chats, within online marketplaces, and it's taking off. Who'da thunk, right? For products where you need humans, in-store intelligence. So I would have never thought that would have taken off the way it did had it not been, pandemic.
They actually answered the question, and then they said the marketers, they're very good in the cost drivers for the company, but not for the personal itself, not for the person itself.
Okay, so when they mean the user?
I think so. I think my understanding is they probably provide a tool for enterprises in the marketing team.
Yeah, so I mean, I can tell you this, based on the answers I'm getting, and again, fantastic, they're asking the questions, but if we were sitting across from each other, I can tell by the questions that I don't hear it clear, we do this for this, right? Our user solves this problem. And the user's enterprise, who they work for, gets this benefit, right? I don't hear that. So I would work to achieve that if I were them, is get to that place. I know you're asking me how to do that. And what I would do is I would follow the sort of the templates that we discussed today.
Perfect. And Jessica asks, if my product is aligned with COVID-19, shouldn't we writing in the hotspot?
What was the question?
The question is, if my product is aligned with COVID-19, shouldn't we writing in the hotspot?
So their product is aligned. So are they in the healthcare space?
For that, yes, Jessica says yes, they're in there.
Got it. So, and they address what, treatment or testing or
Genetic.
genetic? Okay, yeah. So yes, I mean, that is, you know, that space right now is like autonomous vehicle space 3 years ago, right? I mean, great interest. And it's very important, by the way. So absolutely, you're extremely well aligned. The challenge, of course, is that there are a lot of players in that space. So how do you differentiate yourselves from everyone else in your space?
Great.
Rhetorical question, I don't expect them to answer it.
Yes. She actually followed up. She said, it's really new in the market and nobody knows about it yet.
Well, and so that's not good, right? You definitely want people to know about it. So.
Okay. Cool. And then this question, what do you think about the lessons from the Lean startup? Is it too much to ask to synthesize lessons from Chasm and Lean on the fly?
Yeah, so again, I'm only talking about product to market fit. It's so funny they asked that because my wife is part of WAFA, this Wharton Women, and she just interviewed Steve Blank on Monday, for a webinar. Of course, he's considered the father of the Lean startup, right? So yes, my entire career has been in the Lean startup, if that helps. So, there are a lot of different names for things, but they often are the same things. This is my taxonomy, right? This is what I've developed over 20 years of working in enterprise startups. My taxonomy when I began was pretty light, right? I had to learn all this stuff, and so what I'm trying to do today is let you folks benefit from my experience and say, listen, if I knew this, when I started my startup or when we grew that company, I would have been so much farther out. So I think the templates, forgive me for the templates, but the templates provide a guidance for you folks. Like go get, Chasm. Chasm is a really good book to work through. It isn't the only thing you look through, but I'm pretty certain that most companies that are listening in today are lean, right? We're all very few people trying to do a lot of different things. Again, the sailboat analogy, you got the crew that you have. And, it's not like you're out in the race course and you're like, oh man, no one knows how to set a chute. Oh, call up someone, get them out here. Like, you're out there, you can't waste time. You got to get good at it. So that was my point with, market research. If you're being clever and strategic about buying it, great. My sense though is there's a lot of people out there, in the Valley, especially, who make a living by giving information or advice or whatever, and they're more mercenary than missionary, right? And that's fair. It's their business, right? But they just want to sell you something, right? That's their job. You guys have to figure out what's worth spending money on. I have limited resources. How do I get to my destination? How do I win this sailboat race with the same wind that my competitors have? Like, it's really challenging, right? So, and then make a decision, right? Don't sit back and delay it. Make a decision, move on. But I think if you use a template and you force yourself to go through these things, it's all good.
Great. I know we're running out of time, but we still have a few questions. So everybody, if you want to stay, and we will answer all of the questions. And the session is recorded. You can also, I'll share with you if you need. My email, zoe@pmptc.com. But Stephen, if you have time, we can go over the questions. So it's all recorded. Here it's the question: if your solution was initially targeted to one industry vertical and is getting demand from other industry verticals, should you expand your sales efforts across industries or stay focused first on your initial use case?
Really good question. And it comes up a lot, of course, right? One, love the fact that you guys have developed a product and a solution that is industry agnostic, right? Although I don't completely buy it, right? Because if it's an AI product, especially, right, where you need data science to build that application to solve problems, and I'm not saying you are, I'm just saying, you know, it may be. There is value in going deep into an industry segment. Now, whether or not you're in the best one, that's a good question, right? You may not be in the best industry segment. It really depends on your resources, but it's better to go deep and succeed than go wide, right? And get, you know, 3% of the market and then open it up to other competitors who start going after your industries. So again, I don't know anymore, you know, I mean, it's a very fact specific question, but a very good one to ask. So you're asking the right question. So I would walk through that analysis, right? Look at your resource use, look at your burn rate, look at, you know, do those industries require you to adjust the product? How much more engineering time and product time and design time is required to hit those industry segments? You know, you have to look at all those things really carefully. But again, don't spend months doing it. You do it in days or weeks. And I'll say this. Everyone can hit me on LinkedIn. You know, I'm findable. I'm absolutely happy if you guys want to reach out and just, you know, ask me these questions. And if I can know a little bit more about your companies, I'm happy to do that as a courtesy. So don't worry if you don't get a question answered today. You can hit me on LinkedIn.
Cool. And here we have this one. Would you recommend to focus on selling to very large prospects early in the process, or would start with smaller prospects?
Another great question. So remember when I was talking about the Fortune 50s who I've worked for, you know, and the early stage companies, I should say the Fortune 500. You have to figure out, again, do your P to M fit? How do you solve that problem? But if you're telling me that there's a Fortune 50 and a Fortune 500 with the same exact problem, and you're a revenue driver, you know, and you're significantly disruptive, I would say, yeah, you're probably going to have to take the meeting with the Fortune 50, but you have to understand who is in the Fortune 50. And there are folks that don't get paid to take risks, right? They're risk averse. I've worked there. It's exhausting. So the folks that need you or probably need your product to be competitive are the guys that are number 2 or 3 in that space. You know, they're the folks that will generally be first movers on your product because they want to unseat the Fortune 50. So all I'm saying is you can't say, like, let's say Amex says yes. You have a product that hits Amex and name the, not necessarily card services, but let's just say financial services. And there are other companies that are smaller, but, you know, maybe $1 billion in revenue or $800 million in revenue, you know, where you unlock a real ability for them to get more market share. They're going to move faster because, one, they're smaller and they're more hungry, guaranteed.
Beautiful. And the last question we have is from Sanjay, and he asks, what are the good indicators that you have found product market fit, like you already crossed the chasm? Is it not a point in time, rather a phrase when you think you have crossed the chasm?
Yeah, that's an awesome feeling, by the way. What happens is that you can start hiring salespeople because your closure rate on sales goes way up. The time to your pipeline, the life cycle of customer pitch to deployment goes way down. So you start seeing these things happen, and then it becomes clear that you've nailed the value sale. And so you don't need to be there anymore, right? You need to pay attention, but now you can have a salesperson go and literally, you know, hit the market segments that you've targeted and close those sales and build up your biz ops teams to make sure that your customers are delighted and thrilled and really getting value out of your product. So it'll be, quite frankly, it'll be very apparent. You'll know it when it happens.
Perfect. I think that's all from our audience. And again, Stephen offered if you guys have more questions, feel free to reach out to him, or you can reach out to me. I'll make email intros for you guys, but he's on LinkedIn. And the session is recorded. You can email me for the recording as well as the DAC.